Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm here with Amanda Davis from Oregon State University. And we're here talking about the research they've got going on in berry crops right now. We're starting out in the blueberry plots. We're down in the Aurora area at the North Willamette Research and Education Center. Amanda, thanks for having me.
All right, I'm glad to be here to talk a little bit about our research and kind of how we're growing our berry crops here. So this is a research trial that we planted in the fall of 2016, and this one is all the Duke variety. So this is one of the most commonly grown varieties. It's an early season. It's a good, reliable producer and one of the most popular grown by commercial farmers here in our area, and also into the eastern part of the state and up in Washington as well. So this first part of the field, you can see throughout this field the different types of mulches. If you can see back behind me, there's just a sawdust mulch, which is also a pretty common way of producing blueberries, either using a Douglas fir sawdust or using this black landscape fabric, or weed mat we call it. The weed mat, this black weed mat, is at this point the most commonly used mulch and weed control method for both organic and conventional farmers. It's a little expensive to put down in the first place, but it's just in terms of weed control effectiveness and lowest cost of weed control. Our research has shown that that's really the way to go. So that's been adopted by our growers over the last 10-15 years based on the research that we've done here at the station. But we were curious in this research project, one of the pitfalls of the black weed mat is that it warms up the soil. It can increase water use just because our plants are growing and the soil is warm, and they're requiring more water than when we use something like a sawdust mulch. So if you can see, the other mulch that we used is a green color, which is not common. It's hard to find, but we wanted to go ahead and do the research on it and see if that could still prevent weeds from growing, but be a little bit better for moderating our soil temperature. So that's what we wanted to check here. And then we also have either just the weed mat on top of the soil, or we have a layer of sawdust and then the weed mat on top of that. So that layer of sawdust, the idea is to help buffer the soil temperature from the sun, but also to increase the organic matter of the soil. So blueberries are a crop that likes to have a high organic matter. So we're looking for it to typically between 3 and 5% organic matter in our soil would be considered good. If you're getting below that, it's not as ideal for them. The sawdust over time will break down and get incorporated into that soil and raise the organic matter. So we wanted to find out how quickly that would happen, if that affects the plants during establishment, which is the first couple of years of being in the ground. At this point, we just finished up our harvest season a few weeks ago for 2020, and so that's our third harvest season for this field. And I haven't done the statistics so far, but so far in the past couple of years, the green weed mat has been pretty similar to the black. So we are seeing a little bit lower soil temperatures, but it's not really impacting the plant growth and how much fruit, the yield, or the fruit quality that we're getting off of those. But we have found that adding a layer of sawdust underneath this black weed mat is giving us more vigorous plants, larger plants, and a little bit higher yield in some years than when we just have the black alone. So that seems like a pretty beneficial thing.
Nice.
And one of the goals of this study is to find out if the added cost of adding that sawdust is worth it in terms of how much fruit we're producing.
Sure.
So we'll be doing that.
Have you gone the other way too and done the weed mat and then sawdust over the top?
Yeah, so we don't recommend doing that, because what happens over time is that the roots will actually grow into the sawdust above the weed mat. And
you get new feeder roots in the sawdust.
Yeah, and then that's getting dried out, and that's a pretty tough environment, because oftentimes these are drip irrigated underneath the weed mat,
Sure.
and then they're not getting access to the water and the nutrients, because the fertilizer is also going through the drip system at that point. And so they're putting energy into these roots that are on top of the weed mat, which aren't really able to access the water and the nutrients that they need. So
makes sense.
We don't recommend that.
Okay. Yeah. So you said this one went in 2016. How old are the bushes when you first plant the plot like that?
They're typically about 1.5 years old. So those were in, I believe they were in liter pots at that point. It's usually 1 to 2 liters. And then we just get them from a commercial blueberry nursery here in Oregon. And These are spaced at 3 feet apart. Typical plant spacing is usually between 2.5 to 3 feet, depending on the variety. We gave these a little bit more space than normally a commercial grower would because we were also planning on digging out the plants. So we've done that in some of these plots to look at root growth as well as the top of the plant growth. So that's part of how we're trying to find out if these mulches are impacting not only what we can see, but also the below ground portion of the plant.
Okay. So this would have been maybe the second year then you harvested here? Or?
Third year.
Third year?
So we had
okay.
a very, let's see, 18, 19, and 20. Yeah, we had a light crop in 2018. We pruned them the winter before just to have a little bit of fruit on them, but we got nice big berries and, you know, considering the plants had grown vigorously the year before, we felt they could handle a crop. And then that's just been increasing. Last year we had a lot of bird damage because we had a big flock of starlings, so the yield wasn't quite as high as we would have liked for the second year, but this year we managed to keep them out of here a little bit better. So
nice. And then when do they come into full production?
So blueberries take usually 6 to 8 years to come into full production, and then after that, depending on the weather and how you've pruned the year before, the winter before, the yield will sort of fluctuate about an average. And then they can be in production for, you know, 50 to 100 years.
Wow.
If they're well maintained with weeds controlled, good irrigation, disease management. So,
cool, yeah, these look great right now. I noticed the T-posts laying on the ground. What's that all about?
Yeah, so the T-posts laying on the ground are just to hold the weed mat in place. So when you first lay the weed mat down, unless you have, what commercial farmers will do, they have an implement that will actually bury the edges of the weed mat. We don't have that here, and so we use a lot of ground staples to keep them in the ground, but anytime the ground is soft or wet and you get a big wind, that will carry these strips of weed mat like a sail. So we just had extra T-posts laying around, so it's just to weight everything down.
Yeah.
At this point everything's kind of rusted and stuck in the ground, so they could go out, but we haven't needed them. So
cool.